The spring break crowd. Here we go. A few quiz questions to begin. Think about the answer, then I'll ask you to shout out here. The genre of the book of Revelation, is it a letter? Is it prophecy? Is it apocalyptic literature? It is all the above. See, I tried to switch the order tonight, see if that would fool anybody, but didn't fool Brian at least. Hopefully didn't fool the rest of you either. These are different, so don't just fall back on Sunday's answers. Which of these are some of the characteristics of apocalyptic literature? So I'll read them, you think about it, then we'll go through them. Intentionally confusing, takes you out of or above time and space, divides history into periods. It encourages you to hold on, and it's written to predict timelines. So multiple of these things can be true. Which ones of these do you think are true of apocalyptic writing like Revelation? Okay, so I've heard B. We'll go in order. B, yes, the idea of transcendent, right? Pulled up to see, large spans or all of human history at one time, okay? As well as to see heaven itself, in John's case, or the heavenly realm. So, yes, B, it takes you above space and time. I heard D, apocalyptic literature encourages the reader to hold on, right? It's tough. There's crisis, there's distress, persecution. Just hold on, okay? That's what apocalyptic writing like Revelation is trying to accomplish. Any others? The hedged answer. Thank you, Albert. So C is correct, at least yes, depending on how I'm defining the terms here. One of the things we talked about on Sunday with timing is that in apocalyptic literature, it's very common to divide up history into, say, 7 time periods or 10 time periods. Now, it is not E, and it is not primarily to predict, well, literally we're in this time period and it's going to be this many more years before the next one or toward the end of the world, and we can calculate it and we can predict, hey, the world's going to end in 1953. But it does do D, right? So C and D kind of go together. Apocalyptic literature tells you, hey, God is in control. He's ordered everything according to his master plan. We don't know the master plan. We can't figure out the master plan, right, in terms of specifics, but we can know we're almost there, right? Just hold on a little bit longer, and God will reward those who are faithful to the end, faithful unto death. Okay, so B, C, and D were the answers there. That's why we do this, to discuss these things, give us a chance to review. All right, we talked about prophecy as my phone goes off here. Let me just silence that. Thank you, David Haley. What do biblical prophets do? Okay, the prophets in the Bible, what do? Do they describe future events? Do they enforce covenants? Do they interpret history? Yes, the answer is all of those things. Remember, A, describe future events, is a component of what prophets do, but it's not the primary thing, okay? Being a prophet in the Bible is not simply, hey, watch me predict all the things that are going to happen in the next 50 years, 100 years. The prophets would do that. Remember, Moses said in Deuteronomy 18, that's how you can know if a prophet is a true prophet, because he says something will come to pass, and it does come to pass. But the larger purpose and mission of the prophets is much broader than just, hey, this is going to happen. Watch it happen, okay? It's about interpreting history from God's perspective and enforcing God's people to stay faithful or to repent and come back to keeping of the covenant, okay? And then I think the last one here, prophecies in the Bible only ever have one single fulfillment. True or false? False. That's the idea of layers of fulfillment. Even think about a passage, we didn't go to this one, but think about like an Isaiah 7 passage, the virgin will conceive and bear a son. Most people agree that there is a child within Isaiah's lifetime that's referred to. Maybe it's Isaiah's wife that's going to conceive and bear a son. Maybe this child is Hezekiah that's going to be born, right, as the son of the king. We don't really know for sure. But the idea is that there probably was a child being referred to in the immediate. But obviously, the prophecy of the virgin conceiving and bearing a son, and his name shall be called Emmanuel, is looking forward to some. There's another layer, which is much greater when Jesus is born of the Virgin Mary. Okay? So, those last two class periods cover two of the three things that we want to talk about as we are introducing the book of Revelation. It is a revelation. It is an apocalypse. It's apocalyptic writing. We talked about what that means and how that helps us to read the book. And it is a prophecy. And we talked about what that means and how that helps us understand what we're reading in the book. Okay? And you put those two things together, and we will return briefly to this graph that I showed you a week ago on Wednesday. Okay? That there is a range of how we can interpret the book of Revelation. And people have fallen in different places in terms of how they choose to interpret Revelation. Some interpret the book of Revelation on one extreme as a code. When we say it's a code, that means every detail, every aspect of the imagery, every aspect of the symbolism correlates to some historical reality, right? So every horn on the beast is a named emperor or king or president, okay? And every period of time is a piece of the timeline that we can calculate and say this correlates to this historical event or time period. That's what we mean by a code. There's a lot of people that interpret Revelation, I got to point your direction, not mine, as a code. On the other extreme, we could interpret Revelation as a lens, which means that the images and the symbols of Revelation are not intended to correlate to some historical reality. They are merely intended to paint a picture, and that picture helps us to learn some lessons that we can then use to apply to any situation that we're in, right? So the beast or a dragon in Revelation or whatever, let's say it's just, it's not Rome, it's not the USSR, it's just a picture of a human kingdom, any human kingdom, and we see the way that God treats these human kingdoms, we see the way that the human kingdom treats Christians or God's people, and so we can use that as a lens if we're living in 21st century America to view the United States of America, or we could use it in the 1700s, okay, to look at the United Kingdom and its empire across the world, okay. So it's not a code; it's more a lens that we can use it to view whatever experience we have in any time in history, okay. Speaking of history, on the other axis here, we have a choice about how we're going to view the time focus of Revelation. From our vantage point, is Revelation talking about events that have already taken place? This was kind of the question that Brian asked on Sunday. Is Revelation describing events that in our vantage point are in the past, in the rearview mirror? Okay. Is Revelation talking about events that are happening right now in our present, that we can turn on the news and we can see the events of Revelation unfolding or something like that? Or is Revelation talking about something that from our vantage point has not happened yet, has not taken place? It's in the future. Okay. These are the choices we have to make as we're interpreting Revelation. I'll give you two examples that I've given you before of ways that people have historically interpreted Revelation that I think are not really quite right, although they may pick up on something right here and there. One is what's called the futurist reading. A futurist reading of Revelation would say it's a code. Okay? It can be deciphered, right? It can be calculated, and it's talking about events that are in our future. This is basically like reading Revelation in order to put together a timeline of how the world's going to end, right? And Russia invaded Ukraine. Well, that's the next, piece of the Revelation code that's leading towards the end of the world, and we can decipher that and we can figure that out. Okay, that's a futurist reading of Revelation. I don't think that's the right way to read Revelation. But I will say that the futurist has one thing right, and that is that Revelation does talk about things that have not yet happened, I think, from our vantage point. So that look to the future is fine in some instances, but the overall interpretation, I think, is flawed. A similar view, but in some ways different, is the preterist view, which takes the same kind of view of Revelation as a code that is predicting all these historical events. But in the preterist view, everything has already happened. Nothing is kind of left out there, right? So whatever happened in the first century, maybe in the second century, those things fulfilled all of the predictions in Revelation, okay? And so the locusts, right, with military, paraphernalia, that's the Roman army, the Roman chariots, so on and so forth. You can connect all the events of Revelation to historical things that have already taken place, and it's over and done with. Okay. Again, I think this is a flawed reading of Revelation. And what did you say? What is a preterist? That's what I've just described, I guess. Well, preterist has to do with the past tense, right? Like the preterite in grammar is a past tense. Bob's giving me a vigorous head nod. Bob is a grammar expert. He's got it. Yeah. Preterite, yeah. So the preterist sees everything as already being completed in the past tense. Okay. I think this is a flawed reading of Revelation. Okay. Although, as we will see tonight, I do think it is proper to ground ourselves in the first century context and the context of Christians living in the Roman Empire. But to say it's all been completely fulfilled already, nothing's left standing, has no kind of correlation to anything now or in the future, I think is wrong. Okay, so this is what we're going to try to do. We're going to try to, in this class, go on to the other end. Not completely. There will be things in Revelation that we read it and say, hey, this correlates to the Roman Empire, okay, in my opinion, right? Or this is this person, okay? So there is some of that code type interpreting of Revelation. But for the most part, we want to read Revelation as a lens that applies really to any time and place in history. It's going to have a lot of relevance in the past, obviously, because the original readers received this letter, as we will see, to give them comfort and encouragement. But it's events and telling stories and showing us a vision of reality that is very much needed today, as we will see, in our present circumstance. Okay, and it gives us a vision of the future, of what will happen, either beyond our lifetime or in our lifetime, if Jesus returns then, that will help us in understanding what's going to happen in the future, and look forward to that with eager anticipation. Okay. I know the graph is kind of confusing. That's why I debated whether even to use it in class. I have chosen to do so now twice, so it's a double mistake perhaps, but I'll give you opportunity to ask any questions you have about this. If you want to clarify something or ask about something, now's your chance, or you can see me later, of course. A centralist? Is that what you said? That's kind of what this is trying to do. Isidro, good question. Thank you for that. The reason this is kind of, elongated, from top to bottom is to say, I think we can see all of it, right? It's grounded in its original context, right, in the first century. It's still relevant today, right? It tells us how to view the events of our own lives, right? And it helps, it shows us something about the future, right? Does that make sense? So I think with the time thing, it covers all of those bases. Okay. So tonight we are moving on then to what I think is the third aspect, the third piece of Revelation that's important to understand to read it properly, which is, as it says in verse 4, that Revelation is a letter that is addressed to specific people living in a specific time. Okay, verse 4 of Revelation, says, John, to the 7 churches that are in Asia. And the text actually continues in chapter 1. A little bit later on, a few verses down in verse 9, John writes, I, John, your brother and partner in the tribulation and the kingdom and the patient endurance that are in Jesus, was on the island called Patmos. Why was John on Patmos? On vacation? Nope. On account of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. Okay. For preaching Jesus, most likely, John was exiled to the island of Patmos. I was in the Spirit, he says, on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet saying, write what you see in a book and send it to the 7 churches, to Ephesus, to Smyrna, to Pergamum, to Thyatira, to Sardis, to Philadelphia, and to Laodicea. Okay? The book of Revelation is a letter that was written to real people in a real time. That's what we want to talk about tonight. Who are those people, right? Well, they're the people that worship or that live and worship in Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. as a general principle here, okay, when you read the New Testament, for the most part, we are reading, as you might have heard someone say before, we're reading other people's mail. Okay, that's a good way to think about reading the New Testament epistles. Epistles means letters. We're reading letters, right, that were sent from one person to the other. These letters were not written to us. Okay, you understand what I mean by that, right? They were not addressed to you and to me. Now, they are written for us. Okay, the Bible is clear about that Scripture continues to be, inspired of God, profitable, right? For instruction, correction, rebuke, admonition, as Paul tells Timothy, that the man of God in every time and place can be thoroughly equipped for every good work. So it's for us, but these letters were written to other people. In this case, they were written to the churches in the Roman province of Asia. Okay, so what that means is that whenever you read the Bible, and by the way, this is true of anything in the Bible. This is true of Exodus. This is true of Psalms. This is true of Isaiah. This is true of Acts. Okay, and it's true of the epistles in the New Testament, including Revelation. Okay, the first thing you have to figure out in Bible study is, what did it mean to the people who were reading it and receiving it for the first time? What did it mean to them? Okay, this is maybe most clear or most obvious in a book like 1 Corinthians. Okay, you remember in 1 Corinthians, Paul is addressing one after the other, like very specific situations in that church with specific people that are doing certain things. They need to be corrected for the most part. Okay, and when you study 1 Corinthians, it's very obvious. Hey, first we got to figure out what is going on in Corinth, right? What's the situation? Because if you don't know that, then you don't really understand what Paul is trying to correct or what he's trying to instruct. And the same basic principle holds true throughout the New Testament. You first have to ask, what did it mean for the people who received this letter in the first place? Then, once you understand that, then you can start to connect the dots to us. Okay, if that's what it meant for them, and then this is the main lesson, this is the principle, this is the message, what does that mean for us? How does that apply to us? And we can start to make correlations to our lives and to our circumstances. But we don't want to get that out of order. We don't want to read the Bible and our first question be, well, what do I think that means for me? Okay. There's more to it than that, and placing it in its original context is critical. Okay, and what that means is we have to understand what situation the original readers were in. Again, we made that example from 1 Corinthians, but the same thing is true of Revelation. We would ask ourselves, well, those Christians that are named in chapter 1, the letter is to those Christians in those 7 churches. What's their situation? What's their life like? What are they going through? What are they experiencing? Okay. And then how does Revelation speak to their circumstance? And then, once we understand that, then we can say, okay, what does it say for our circumstance? Right? So how do you do that? How do you understand, how do you learn about the situation of the first people that read this book of Revelation? Okay? They lived 2,000 years ago. How in the world are we to know what their situation was? Okay? Anybody have an answer to that? I didn't mean to ask that, but how would you do that? So history can tell you some things, and that's a valuable resource. There is external evidence. By that we mean outside of the Bible that we can read, understand, say, hey, we know what was going on in this time and place, and that gives us context. But is there another way? Yeah, that's right. Good job, Brian, picking up on the context clues here. In almost every book of the New Testament, you can read in the book itself, right, which is helpful. We go into the text and draw out from the text, what does the text tell us? Are there clues, right? You put on your detective hat. What are the clues in the text that tell us what the situation was of these readers, right, and of these churches? And that's actually what we want to hopefully spend more time on tonight. And I do have some of the other as well, some of the external evidence. But let's start with internal evidence. And this was in your booklet, so if you had time to do this, then I want you to share what you found. If not, you can probably right now just look through in your Bible, look through chapters 1, 2, and 3. These are fairly familiar chapters, the 7 letters to the 7 churches. So you may remember some things. You can look through there. If you just read chapters 1, 2, and 3, where these churches are specifically addressed in their specific situation, what do you find in these first 3 chapters? What do you find about the situation of these readers in these churches of Asia? Roman Asia, that is. Give me one thing, Brian.
Doing some things wrong.
Okay, so a mixed bag in terms of how they're doing. Okay, some doing things right, some doing things wrong. Some places they're doing all of it. Okay, what else did you find, or do you remember about the situation of these churches, some or all of them, as revealed in the first 3 chapters? Let's go to Albert here.
External. Against their faith, from the folks outside of their faith, and there was challenges within their faith as well.
Okay, internal and external challenges. What's this? Just as I am, conflict without and fears within, or something. But then they changed it in one of the books, and so now I can never remember the phrase. But yeah, external and internal. Let's talk about each of those. Maybe give me some specifics if you can find them or remember them. What kind of external challenges or external pressures are referenced in these chapters? Mike?
I just threw down a list.
Yeah.
I mean, in a lot of situations, like, good things were mentioned about them, but I said, left their first love, they had tribulation, poverty, persecution, following false teachers and religions, appeared to be alive but dead, problems of persecution for those who are or claim to be Jews, and spiritual apathy.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. And you hear some of the external stuff in there: tribulation, persecution. Some of the stuff, Mike even mentions the specifics of the Jewish pressure. We read in a couple of the letters, which is interesting. We don't want to do all of these. We have 2 classes devoted to these chapters coming up next week, so we don't do too much in here. But they're facing persecution. They're facing tribulation. Mike mentioned some of the internal stuff. Okay, Albert, did you have anything specifically in mind when you say internal challenges?
I forgot through there. As Mike mentioned, leaving their love and their initial thoughts, as well as holding steady to the word, but yet forgetting what the purpose of knowing that word was, or the message, incompleteness.
Yeah. Mike? Thank you, Albert. Mike?
We talk about, and have been talking tonight about context with the people, and I think, you have to take away everything that we know and put that in a box and put yourself in their position where, as many of them, they've either come from a Jewish, heritage, or they're coming from a Gentile heritage. And in both situations, what they know and have been raised in has been dramatically different from what they have been taught really in just the last 20 to 30 years, and many of them as being brand new Christians, which is within just a few years. And I think, for all of us, we us even today, we get set in our ways about how things are done, and it's very uncomfortable to come out of our box. I mean, imagine today if someone came into our church, if Jesus came today and hadn't come in and came to us the way that we do things now and said, everything's different, and I'm going to have these 12 guys that are going to come to you, everything that you have ever known, that your ancestors have done forever, all of it is different. And even with the best of intentions to follow those things, how hard it would be to say, the Lord's Supper is over, we're not doing this anymore. The preaching, and we're not going to do that the same way. Now, song leading, we're going to use instruments from now on. How jarring some of these things would be for us, and what a situation that they were in, struggling with making several of those changes, even with the best of intentions, how hard that would be.
Oh, thank you, Mike. And you think about the newness of all of this for the Christians. Let me add something to that too. Christianity wasn't just new for the people that had been converted; it was also new for who else? The whole world around them, right? Christianity was a brand new thing. You're not talking about 2,000 years of kind of everyone understands what Christianity is generally, and you're kind of familiar with it. You're talking about a brand new religion on the scene that people don't know what to do with. Okay, Jews don't know what to do with it, right? They're mostly angry. The Romans don't know what to do with it. Okay, there's evidence of that as well. So yeah, the newness of this is kind of like you said. You have to try to get into that world that's very different from ours.
Wrong.
That's right.
That when it's the to the unknown God, that this is right and this is right and this is right. Let's study it all. I mean, that's similar to what goes on today. That not only is this new, all of the others are wrong.
Yeah.
And how hard that is to accept.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Mike. Brian, add something here.
Some churches appeared to be approaching apostasy. They were neither hot, they were neither cold, they were lukewarm. So they lost their fervor, and Christ warns them that he'd prefer they be one or the other because they are not following after God. And then you have in Sardis, they're just about all apostatized, and they brag about their riches, and he warns them how miserable and poor they are, and that their candle is about to go out.
Oh, thank you, Brian. All right, Robert, and then we're going to move on here.
Just one more aspect
Yeah.
of the individual that comes out. There's specific sins that are mentioned that some of the individuals in the church are committing sexual immorality. There's one that talked about you become wealthy, not needing God. So that concept of not just internal but specific individuals.
Yeah, sure. And there will be people named, probably not their real names, okay, unless someone named their daughter Jezebel, but at least specific individuals that are clearly referenced, okay? Idolatry, yeah, mentioned in there too. All right, I'll give you these, and all of these have been said, so y'all did the work for me, and we'll continue to refer back to these again, if nothing else, in the 2 class periods in which we talk about these first 3 chapters. I'm going to give you the 3 main dangers. Brian, I tried really hard to think of the same letter for all of them, but no good. Nothing came to mind. All right. I do too. Persecution is a big one. Okay, and these kind of go together. You can see the links between these two. Persecution, for sure. Okay. Do you notice John said in his intro, "I am your I am." What did he say? Partner. Verse 9 of chapter 1. I am your partner in the tribulation. Okay, he's experiencing persecution. He said, I'm right there with you. Okay, chapter 2, verse 9 mentions the slander of these so-called Jews, synagogue of Satan. Chapter 2, verse 13 actually mentions somebody from the church that had been killed for their faith, Antipas, right? There's other references to the persecution that the Christians have or are going to experience. And so that's clear. They're dealing with persecution from the outside. Okay? They're also dealing with the temptation to compromise. Some of them have, they've given into the temptation. They have compromised. Okay? There is 2 references. In chapter 2, verse 6, the church in Ephesus has resisted the teaching of the Nicolaitans. And in chapter 2, verse 14, the church of Pergamum has some within the church that are holding this teaching of the Nicolaitans. Again, not to teach this ahead of time. We don't really know what that doctrine was, but it seems to be a doctrine that was basically saying, hey, it's okay to go along with all the stuff that we're being pressured to do. There's a way to kind of justify that with our, Christianity. Hey, that relaxes some of the persecution when you can find a way to agree and to go along with those on the outside. Okay, and then there was references to the immorality and all that kind of stuff. The temptation to compromise is a huge danger for the churches in Revelation, and this temptation or this giving into apathy, which that word is actually used. I think Mike used that word. But the 2 most famous examples, of course, are the church at Ephesus. They've lost their first love. That's the first church. And then the last church, the church of Laodicea, which is lukewarm. As Robert said, I'm rich, right? I'm in need of nothing. That's the attitude of the lukewarm church in Laodicea. So persecution, compromise, that sounds like a great quiz question, doesn't it? Right? What are the 3 main dangers facing the churches in Roman Asia in the first century? Okay, persecution, compromise, and apathy. All right, let's do a little bit of historical stuff before we wrap up here. So we got about 15 minutes to do that. All right, here's one map. I like this map because it shows us the province of Roman Asia in context of other Bible places, right? So here's Judea here and Jerusalem down here on the right corner, bottom corner of your map. And then up around the Mediterranean, okay, this is modern-day Turkey, okay? See the region of Galatia, kind of in the middle there. This region of Cilicia and Cappadocia is prominent because of Tarsus, where Saul is from. But on this left kind of third of modern-day Turkey here is the Roman province of Asia, okay? And that's where these 7 churches are located right here. Pretty close to each other, actually, geographically. But, they weren't driving cars around the Beltway. So the cities were closer together, and each of them had their individual churches, okay? Here is modern Turkey. okay, and where those 7 cities lie on our map there on the western edges of Turkey. So it's Roman Asia, the Roman province of Asia. Let's talk a little bit about what we know about the Roman province of Asia, okay? This is not in here in the PowerPoint, so I'll just go ahead and say it. For the record, so everyone knows, there is a dispute. I was going to say there's a dispute about the book of Revelation. Like, that's like the dumbest statement that could ever be made in a Bible class. There's just one. There's just one thing about Revelation that people don't agree on, okay? And this is it. One of the major disputes about Revelation is when it was written, okay? And you'll hear maybe people talk about, you'll read about the early date or the late date, okay? The early date would be like in the 60s during the reign of Nero, if you've heard of Nero, the Caesar, the emperor. The late date would be like in the 90s during the reign of the Emperor Domitian, okay? And I'm going to lean towards that, but there's a lot of smart people that take either position, okay? And there's evidence, strong evidence in many cases for either position, so I'm not going to make a big deal out of it, okay? But I am going to work under the assumption that the book was written towards the very end of the first century in the 90s under the reign of Domitian. And you'll see how some of that fits in here in a second. But I think that a lot of this holds true, if not all of it holds true, regardless of when the book was written, because we're talking about a 30, 40-year stretch here in the same place. And so in terms of the history, the culture, the context, a lot of it is going to be similar, okay? Roman Asia was one of the wealthiest provinces in the Roman Empire, okay? So again, we're not talking about Rome itself, okay? We're talking about a province, but it was very wealthy, and it was very pro-Roman, and those two things are connected, if you can understand that, okay? So a region that was very supportive of Rome, very supportive of the empire, also became one of the wealthiest provinces. Ephesus is kind of the center of this province, and you get a picture of some of that in the book of Acts. When Paul spends a lot of time in Ephesus, and you get the sense that it's a huge city, it's a metropolis, and there's a lot of wealth there. Remember the riot about the silversmiths that made a lot of money? Remember how much money they burned in those books, right? When they repented of their sins in Acts chapter 19. So there's a lot of wealth in Ephesus, a lot of wealth in the Roman province, right, where all of these 7 cities are located. But again, it's very strongly pro-Roman. In fact, by the 90s, for sure, Roman Asia, the province, had become the center and one of the hot spots of what's called the imperial cult, okay? I know that sounds like something out of Star Wars, but the imperial cult is the practice of worshiping the emperor of Rome, worshiping the emperor as a god, okay? This was not a practice early on in Roman history. In fact, early on, the Romans were very careful not to have a dictator at all, okay? And for sure not to worship any of their rulers. They're a republic, right? The people, choose the leaders, and there's, not just one guy that runs everything. Well, that, of course, changed with Julius Caesar becoming a dictator. And then when his adopted son, Augustus Caesar Octavian, takes over, Octavian actually deifies his adoptive father and makes Julius Caesar into a god. And that kind of begins this practice of viewing the emperors as deities, okay? And for a while, it's you deify the emperor after he dies, okay? Not during his lifetime, right? But eventually, that kind of slides into the worship of the emperor as a god, even in his lifetime. And that really starts for the first time during the reign of Domitian, who rules from 81 to 96 AD, okay? Let's see where we are here, okay? But there were temples in these cities. Actually, 3 of the 7 cities of Revelation had temples in their city devoted to the worship of the emperor. And again, this was a major thing, okay? And it was major to the point that it affected every portion of society, okay? So in general, in this very kind of religious society, even, including other things beyond emperor worship, here's a quote from one guy who says, "No one in that time and place could conduct the affairs of everyday existence, even commerce, without recognizing the gods." Okay? So the acknowledgement of the gods was just a normal part of doing everyday life. right? And then add on top of that the emperor becomes worshipped himself, and you have to participate in that in order to basically be accepted into modern society, okay? Or to say modern, into accepted society, okay? So there were economic implications for this, right? So this guy says that there were frequent banquets held by the trade associations in these cities, and those trade associations controlled all of the trade, right? And the activities of the workers in a certain city. And so they would hold these banquets dedicated to the patron gods, and to refuse to attend the banquet often meant one would be prohibited from working in the city, right? So you see the choices had to be made. Do you participate in the banquet in honor of the emperor as deity, right? And in doing that, or do you do that, or do you refuse that and accept that you're going to be excluded, literally, from the marketplace and from being able to buy and sell? In fact, you'll see some of that language we get later on in Revelation. Are you looking at my notes? No. All right, so there are obviously social implications for this as well. Okay, so we're not just talking about being excluded from the marketplace. You're talking about being excluded from, again, acceptable society, okay, and from the community, okay, which is a big deal. And there were also at times legal consequences, imprisonment or death. I gave you the quote in the booklet. I actually don't have it in front of me, so this is a failure of my system here. But you see the quote in the booklet. It's from a little bit later on in history. It's from the governor in Roman Asia, Pliny, writing to the Emperor Trajan, asking about what to do with these Christians that are not participating in the imperial cult and the emperor worship. What do we do with these people? Okay, and Pliny says, "Hey, some of them were brought to me. Right? I'm not hunting them down, right? But some of them were brought to me and accused. So I've tried them and I've tested them. Some of them have renounced their faith in Jesus, so I let them go. Okay, but some refused to do that, so I threw some in prison. We killed some. Okay." And that's kind of, how this went, right? This is one kind of misnomer to correct. It's not a huge deal, but we should know that at this time period and really other time periods in the Roman Empire, there never really was an official, top-down, systematic hunting it down and killing of Christians, okay? Like widespread across the Roman Empire. That's really not the way that persecution worked. It was much more on a local level, where local leaders in various cities or regions kind of did different things. And at certain times, certain places, like in Roman Asia, there was, local leaders deciding to prosecute, to persecute Christians and to terror. So I don't say that to say that, hey, Christians had it easy in the first century, right? But I'm saying, it's a time and place sort of thing. And first century Roman Asia is one of these times and places where there was more persecution because of the Christians' refusal to participate specifically in the worship of the emperor, or as what we're calling the imperial cult. Any questions or comments on this? We're almost there, 6 minutes. Getting close. Okay. So, here's where I get myself in trouble. The situation of the readers of the book of Revelation. We basically, to summarize what we're seeing in first century Roman Asia. Think about, some of this was mentioned earlier, think about the dynamic of now, if we're talking about the 90s, about 60 years since the events of Jesus, okay? That's no small period of time, okay? And you can see that amount of time would allow other things to kind of, creep in, whether it's false teaching, apathy, right? You're talking about a passing of time is significant, right? Any of you that have experienced this, okay, you look back 60 years, right? And, a lot changes in 60 years. And so these readers are decades. We're not talking about, the Christians in Acts that is like Peter showing up for the first time. Hey, Jesus is risen. Some time has passed. And that's the dynamic of their situation. As we saw, they enjoyed, because they lived in a wealthy place, they enjoyed material prosperity. That was at least available to them in their cities and in their region. But they were under pressure to worship the emperor, okay? And we talked about that. And that was something that obviously was a contradiction for their conscience, but this was a real pressure that was placed on many of these Christians across the region. And so they ended up having to choose, for the most part, between faithfulness. Will I remain faithful to King Jesus and worship him only? Or will I choose instead to live a comfortable lifestyle, right? To choose a lifestyle where I'm not really going to be seen as odd. I'm not going to be excluded from the marketplace. I can still make my money. I can still hold position or status in the city and live a comfortable life, okay? Do I remain faithful or do I remain left alone, right? That's the choice that these readers of Revelation have. And as a part of that, they faced false teaching, okay, of different kinds. And they particularly were facing false teaching that was telling them it's okay to compromise. Hey, I can show you, right? I can show you from Scripture how it's all right to bend this, or you don't really have to refuse that, okay? You can compromise, right? And that's an appealing notion, not just rationally, but also emotionally as well. So this is the situation that we have summarized for the original readers of Revelation, which is where we want to start and ground ourselves, as we said from the beginning. But Ryan said it himself, not me, right? That I think that there's quite a bit of correlation to our own situation. I'll offer you some things. I can be wrong. Please correct me if you think I'm wrong. But this is what I see in our situation. Maybe similar to what we say about, the original readers, there's differences in times and places and person to person, right? So we don't want to make too broad, sweeping generalizations here, but these are some things I think that we see in our own situation. We're not decades removed from we're millennia actually. We're 2,000 years removed from Christ. And think about what that has done, the passing of that many years since the events of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. That's our situation, and that presents some challenges. Talk about it in material prosperity of the folks in Roman Asia in the first century. They had no way to even conceive in their minds of what it is that we enjoy in terms of comfort and prosperity and material wealth, right? It would have broken their brains to even, be told what it is that we enjoy and have access to, okay? We enjoy just a crazy amount of material prosperity. But I think in our world, there is pressure to bow the knee. And I'll give you a couple options here so you can choose which of these two things is real or both of them. I do think that nations have always used, from the Roman Empire all the way through to the United States of America, nations have always used this sort of pressure to bow the knee, right, as a way to keep their citizens loyal, okay? And I think you see a lot of that in kind of the dynamics of patriotism and of, this love of America, right? And proud to be an American and all this stuff. I mean, literally there's, America the Beautiful is in our hymn book, right? There's these hymns for America that have a very religious tone to them. And there are certain rituals like the national anthem and the Pledge of Allegiance and even voting, right? That are kind of like these religious rituals that everybody is expected to participate in. If you don't participate in these things, then you're not a right-thinking person. You're not loyal to the flag, all this kind of stuff, right? And don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that all those things are always wrong. I'm just saying I think there's a very similar dynamic at work in the United States that we see, again, not just in these two instances, but all throughout history. That nations always use this kind of pressure, this kind of religiosity, right, to create a religious fervor around the state and the flag and the nation, right? For what reason? Well, for loyalty, right? To be loyal to, above all, right, the U.S. of A. Okay, so I think we see that, and that's a real dynamic that we live in. Now, the second word, maybe you didn't listen to any of that because you're like, what's that other word? Zeitgeist. Okay. Anybody know what the zeitgeist is? It's a German word that means the spirit of our age. The spirit of our age. This may be a bigger deal, or maybe we see this more clearly with our eyes, even though I think the other is real as well. The zeitgeist, the spirit of our age. And the spirit of our age is what normal thinking people deem to be acceptable, right? So maybe the easiest example of this is all the stuff about gender equality and homosexuality, transgenderism, right? There's a changing of the spirit of our age. So now it's like, if you don't think this, then you're just a weirdo, right? You're not accepted into normal society if you don't agree with this, that, and the other, right? And there's even certain things that are expected in terms of, bowing the knee or paying your tribute, right? whether that's during Pride Month, to put something up on your business, right? To put that sticker up, right? To put something in your email signature. These are ways of showing, hey, I pay my tribute, right? I think the right way. I'm on the right team, okay? And so the zeitgeist has that very powerful effect of kind of pressuring everybody into conformity. You see that? That's really what a lot of this is about, conforming to the right way of thinking. So there's some of that going on in our world as well. And so I think our choice, this is the point that Brian mentioned earlier, the corollary, I think in a very real sense, now and in the years to come, maybe especially in the years of our children and grandchildren, there's going to be a choice, and we'll stop saying future. Right now in the present, we have a choice as God's people living in 21st century America. Will we choose faithfulness to God and to King Jesus above all else? Or will we choose to kind of go along with the crowd, to bow the knee, to choose a comfortable, prosperous, materially blessed lifestyle, or choose faithfulness to God no matter what, okay? And of course, there's all kinds of versions of what's called progressive Christianity, right? All sorts of rationalizations and ways of understanding to say, hey, it's okay, right? You can read the Bible a certain way to kind of, compromise our views on, homosexuality or gender roles or whatever, okay? So we face many of the same things that the first century Christians in Roman Asia faced, and so I think Revelation is going to be highly important for us. All right, for Sunday, thanks for giving me a few extra minutes there. For Sunday, we'll do lesson number 4 and talk about what we're going to see in the book of Revelation before we start into chapter 1 a week from tonight. Thank you, guys.